Good day, Ray. Just give it a couple of moments for people to show up.
So Hannes, just before we start and people are here, what are we going to do about minute taking this week? Do we need to appeal for a dedicated minute taker, or do you think we're okay?
I think Hannes was getting coffee and he was saying he was going to take minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah, we just wanted to make sure sometimes when the minute taker is also heavily involved in the discussion, then inevitably things fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
So we're having a bit of discussion about that. But that's good. If Hannes is doing it, we're good.
I'd volunteer, but I think for the identity one, I'll be a little more active. I could take the
Are
other
you saying
one.
you're part of the problem, Steve?
What's aren't we all?
I know I certainly am, yeah.
There's been great discussions on the thread from the individual identities to identities of entities to projects and bankruptcies and half-lives. That it's been really, really fun to watch.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, cool. Somehow audio died. Good. Okay. I think we should get started, right? A few folks showed up. Yeah, there's obviously the public holiday today in the US, and so we have fewer participants. But that happens. It's great to see that there's still some of you here. I'm going to take the meeting minutes. I posted an agenda for today. There were two topics. One was on the identity topic, which we also discussed on the mailing list, and then the second one was on terminology, something that is an open issue for quite some time already. We covered that if time permits. And at the beginning, I also wanted to very briefly talk about the use cases because as you've seen last week, the use case document was submitted. So I was hoping that some of you would take a look at it, do a review, ask for some review feedback on the document. So if I don't know if any one of you who's currently on the call has had a chance to read through the submitted or recently submitted, there was an old version as well, recently submitted version of the use case document. And I'm looking for kind of like high level feedback at this stage because we need to make a decision on whether that's a good starting point for working group call for adoption, or whether we should wait a little bit longer to let the document mature. Yogesh, you raised your hand.
Yeah. Hello, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, last week, me, Hank, Dick Brooks, and Monty Wiseman had a brainstorm, and we kind of incorporated his use case because his use case was slightly a different flavor of what we already have a firmware update use case, where what we focus on the firmware update use case was the prior to applying the firmware, what checks we do and stuff like that. But his use case is using SCITT transparency to kind of elevate the post the firmware update where this is not possible, or in use cases where the post boot activities are also equally relevant. So we concluded that we should have it, so we have added it. only after reviewing the document once submitted, I had also a closer look. As Hannes, you wanted to know, has anyone had a closer look? So I did myself reviewed the documents, and I felt that the sequence of basically the post boot thing could have gone in the last subsection of this list of sequences. So the order of the mess use cases could be improved a bit, but I thought maybe I should take feedback from others in the community, and if they all think it is fine, then I'm happy to go ahead and change the order. And I'm planning to create a GitHub issue if 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 everybody's okay, or Hannes, is it a right time to raise an issue on that? So that's all I had to say.
Cool. Thanks, Yogesh. Yeah, like whatever order you suggest, like you can also post it to the list saying that. But I see Hank and Bob in the queue as well. Hank.
Yeah, hi, this is Hank. First of all, apologies for being late. I'm struggling with this technology. And second of all, I think it's what we want first. Do we want to go through adoption call first and fix this as a working group item? Because effectively, we are treating the document already as a working group item with all the consensus and such. So maybe we move on, so be quick. I think that's a visibility thing, and then fix it. Moving on with open issues looks a little bit, but also I think that's possible. So so we can already document, or we have a proposal even to change structure. But my actual question is, do we want to do this before or after the working group last adoption call?
Yeah, I was hoping to see some, like, obviously, like I expected Yogesh to review the documents, since he's a co-author, or read through the document. But like at this stage, I think it's the only question is, in my opinion, whether the document is good enough to as a starting point for the working group. Because then we would start the call for adoption, or not. So yeah. So Bob, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I looked through it. It reads well. I think Yogesh's suggestion would help it even further. I think it's a good basis for going forward, and I'd suggest we do adopt it.
Cool. Thanks, Bob. That's very useful. Okay. Dick.
Thank you, Hannes. Yeah, I concur with Bob. I think what we have is good enough. It's certainly not perfect, but there's enough there, I think, to set us on a path, a starting point for the software supply chain. So I would agree that we move forward and adopt the document as is. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick. Ray.
Okay, so looks like I'm next. The question: if it seems to me that it might be good to have this something that we can revisit later if there's other things that we think of during the process of devising the architecture, et cetera. It is the approval of this at this stage. Leave that option open. Maybe you can describe what the approval actually means at this stage, and if there is an opportunity to refine it a bit more later if we think of something else. Thanks.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, it's definitely an initial version, and it will be improved later, like as the discussions progress. So yeah, that's the call for adoption would state that. So I think we're on the same page.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay, cool. John is, I think from the feedback I've gotten so far, we should start a call for adoption of the document and let it run for like the usual 2 weeks, and then see whether there's any objection or so.
Yeah, that's perfect, because that actually then it's part of the reason why we've been pushing so hard the last couple of meetings, is that if that call fails for some substantial reason, we just about have time to do an edit round before 116 and then resubmit it for 116, which would be good. So yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. Ray, you're in the queue. Is that from previously, or do you want to say something again? Okay.
No, I forgot to put my hand down.
Neil?
Yeah, but perhaps this is a good time for someone just to review the full set of steps that we contemplate. So you would call for adoption. People would discuss that. If it's adopted, that would tee it up for good review by the wider community, and the IETF meeting itself is a great opportunity to do that. What are the steps that would follow that, and is there? I mean, this is for publication as an RFC at some future point, or what's the rest of the process?
Yes. So we would do the call for adoption, assuming nobody has objections. The authors would then resubmit the working group item. There would be enough time for also for discussions and in an update for the IETF meeting itself. We would put it on the agenda at the next IETF meeting. We'll discuss it there and probably get some more feedback. And then we'll see how the feedback goes and at what stage the group thinks that it's ready. If it is like finalized, then we would do a Shepherd write-up and or do a working group last call, do a Shepherd write-up and send it for publication to the ISG. So that's roughly the plan. But it's still so this would be the first version of the working group document after the call for adoption. So there's still a lot of time to change, and there were other people who said that they would provide some input. So we'll see when that happens.
So, what are the considerations in terms of what you want in a good use case document? I mean, I'm guessing that it's okay for there to be things in the use case that don't actually get addressed in, let's say, the first version of an architecture or an implementation or something, that are further down the road. Are there other aspects of what makes a quality use case document that we should consider as we kind of think about how mature it is?
Yeah, it's like with all the documents, it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder, but in general, like if the group thinks that the content, the use cases inform the debate on, for example, the architecture and also like the requirements that come out of it, I would say then that's actually a good document.
Great, thanks a lot. Yeah,
there's also like in terms of the charter, there's also the threads that need to be described somewhere. It's of course a decision of the group whether what the best place of those description of those threads would be, whether that would be, for example, in the architecture document or would be like also in the use case document. I don't know, could be a separate document as well, but that's something we promise to deliver as well. And looking at the discussion we had just recently on the mailing list in context of the use case document, it appears that that some of the threads have been described there already. So, okay, Henk.
Okay, yeah, unmuting still is a challenge for me. So thank you, Hannes. You basically said it out loud. I think that the personally individual opinion here, that there can be items in the use case document that will not make it into a first round of documents due to charter scope. And that's absolutely fine. But and I think I skimmed your review while in transit. And one of the question was, is this really what you think SCITT should do? I think it was an API thing that's like a subscription, and probably not with the buildings block you're building right now, but maybe later. And it's good to see that this is somehow an entangled use case description, and that without any API, everything SCITT won't make a lot of sense, because how would you use it, right? And so I think it's okay to have something in the use cases that describe a little bit more than what's on the plate right now, and then also maybe have an idea where this is used, and then maybe later we have to write a user scenario in any case. So I think it's okay, the scope as is, unless there are some blatant problems with it that turn up during adoption review.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dick, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Hannes. So I think, we've been dancing around this, and I think the real ultimately what we really need to come to an agreement on is, what is the purpose of SCITT? And what I mean by that is that, it has to provide some benefit to someone. And in this case, my hope is that the consumers are the beneficiaries of SCITT, and that the SCITT registry answers the question they care about, which is a piece of software trustworthy enough to install in their ecosystem? And I think if we can give consumers that visibility, then SCITT will be hugely successful. Thank you.
Thanks. Henk. Okay, you took yourself.
Yeah, again, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Artifact hand.
Okay, artifact. Bob?
So while I agree with Dick that what he said, I think we need to remember that the real power of SCITT is amongst supply chain partners, not the end consumer. I think the real value is going to be when a supplier can get to their suppliers, integrity and claims and information about the product that they're providing into their production. So I don't want to leave it that we're only doing this for end consumers.
Okay, makes sense. Neil?
There you go. I just wanted to, again, push back on the notion that there's going to be a statement in SCITT that says this piece of software is trustworthy and you should trust it. I don't imagine that there will be a statement like that. I would frame it more that the purpose of SCITT would be to document evidence which each individual can use to make their own decision, each supplier, provider, end user, whatever, to make their own decision of whether, for their purposes, their threat model, something is trustworthy. And I think the focus is again on the relying party making decisions based on evidence, rather than SCITT as some anointed infallible oracle of trust.
That's a very nice way of phrasing it. I like that. I'm trying hard to sort of capture everything in the meeting minutes, but yeah, do my best.
And I'm going to just say, out of sequence, I totally support that statement. That SCITT should not be making a judgment. SCITT should have the material for people to make their judgments.
Okay. Yogesh? I think you are on mute, Yogesh. Yogesh? Test. Okay, Yogesh, I think your audio is not working. Raymond, Ray, you want
Yeah,
to?
I after listening or reading various email comments, I did submit an email just before the meeting, and it goes along with what Neil was just saying. There's sort of a disconnect between what Dick usually says and what I usually see as what the transparency server of SCITT and so forth are doing. And there's kind of a model where we could look at two layers. One, and the question is like, how much CRUD do we add on to one entry in a SCITT, server? I would like to suggest that these are kind of concise and simple, and it may take a lot of them to figure things out. Kind of like a risk processor has small statements, as opposed to a sys processor that tries to put a lot into each one. The RIS processor is very powerful because of the simplicity. And the same with the transparency server. If we can put in simple claims, evidence into the server. So think of it as an evidence transparency server. The only thing that goes in there is evidence and no real evaluation of the evidence. And then there's a next layer up, which would be an evaluation of all the evidence regarding a product. And in terms of how old is it, did they go bankrupt? I mean, all these things are pretty complex. And so to put that in the transparency server, I think would be, basically impossible. That could be put one layer up. So Dick, when you're thinking of this, trying to get an evaluation for an end user, which is just a big green button that they get to press, or a big X, that's going to need another layer above that. And so if we could separate those into two layers, and along the lines, kind of along the lines of what RATS did, where they have the evaluator or the verifier block, where things were pushed into the verifier block that are complex. And here we can have the set of evidence, which are small and concise and simple, and then an evaluation layer, which can be maybe brought in by different, specific use cases. And as Dick was saying, yeah, he wants to address that end user. Well, that's one kind of use case, but the other use case that we heard about, which I think is maybe going to be more common, is between business to business, supplier and user, where we want this machine to be really streamlined and not have maybe so much of that upper layer. Okay, well, I put that in the email. I think it might be a good thing to think about. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Ray.
Yeah.
Yogesh,
Sorry, I'm back.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So I 100% agree with what I think it was who mentioned earlier, Neil, and one more, I think Bob, and that this ecosystem is not only for end user or consumer, but it should assist all the stakeholders of the system. So for the suppliers also, how downstream they are dependent on other suppliers, and those kind of things should be also should also benefit from our ecosystem. And in addition to that, there are auditing and those kind of processes also baked into this, which are also users of the system. So consumers means not just we should not see it from one prism. That's what all I wanted to say. And what Ray mentioned about the evidence layer, I think it's slightly tricky because the evaluation of appraisal of evidence is very much could be policy driven based on individual use cases, but we can have some basic simple verification steps like yes, this claim is indeed present. You can cryptographically verify that this claim is present in the SCITT, and then the further processing of that evidence can be done offline by individual consumers of those evidence. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Yogesh. Cedric.
Yeah, so indeed, I think we are largely in agreement on this point. I just want to emphasize that I think it's for a user knowing if some artifact is trustworthy is completely legitimate, and I think that's probably the simplest way of using SCITT. But I really believe that in that case, the relaying parties policy should know which issuer is authoritative for that artifact. And so the simplest policy is that I want to know if this is trustworthy. I know this party, I know the identity party that I'm trusting for it. And as long as it's transparent and recorded, others may be able to do checks, but I'm going to trust a claim issued by that party about that artifact. And I think on that basis, it's much easier to implement than to assume the SCITT ledger will be authoritative for saying whether a particular artifact is good or bad. So, and I think there is a lot of value in more advanced scenarios where, for in particular in business to business, where people will read longer, more complex series of statements and will do some more auditing. But knowing who to trust as an issuer for a given artifact and verifying a single claim is, in a sense, the canonical simplest policy for relaying parties. So I think it's legitimate as long as you look at who the issuer is, because the existence of a claim about something, I think, shouldn't be taken too seriously unless you really want to lock down who can write claims.
Cedric, thanks. If you can also add a little bit of summary into the meeting minutes, that would be great. Yeah.
Okay.
Steve.
Yeah, just I hear this and I hear the range of conversations where Dick is talking about like the end user wants to be able to have some trust and confidence, and we all agree. I think the question kind of goes to somewhat to what Kathleen has also brought up around who the end users are and do they actually have enough knowledge themselves. You know, we have this model where we do defer trust to entities that we trust that are making the analysis for us, whether it be you trust stuff from an Apple, you know, the Apple store, or, you know, your grocery store, unrelated to Apple's as well. You know, I think that that's an important aspect. And that comes back to a brand and an identity. You know, if you have two documents, one that, you know, has this whole thing about how software should be done a certain way, and it's just a blank heading you find on the street, versus another one that has an official, you know, government agency on the top of it that gives it more credibility. And of course, we need to make sure that it's not, you know, the normal checks you do when you look for emails or things that are phishing attacks, right? We're verifying that identity that represents that is accurate. And then if the identity is accurate and it's from an identity we choose to trust, then we can go to evaluate the information. So whether the end user is doing that or the end user is trusting an entity on their behalf, just like most of us run virus software on our computers that are doing those checks for us, I view SCITT as being the secure pipeline to put that information on. The registration policies gate, you know, what goes on because it makes sure that the identities being put on are accurate. And then the consumers choose. The consumers not being end consumers, the entities that are pulling information off SCITT will use that information to make logical decisions. So whether it's, you know, VEX and SBOMs today and some new document in the future, the system will evolve, and we still need to be able to trust the source of information. I think it's those two aspects. Yes, end users, through some sort of delegated proxy. But all of that comes back to, I need to know that I can trust the information that's there, and trust the information is current. There's another aspect I'm trying not to tease off too much of what we knew on January 1st is, what we know at that point. On April 1st, April Fool's Day, we get infected with some virus that actually was put in the software last December, but we didn't know about it yet. So there's a freshness angle that we also need to make sure that we cover as well. So I believe all of those, you need to go back to a source that you can get information that you trust, and then you can make continued decisions on that.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, the identity aspect is something that we wanted to talk about a little bit more during the meeting today. Thanks for bringing that up. Cedric, are you in the queue again or still in the queue?
That's lagging, sorry.
Okay. Dick?
Thank you, Hannes. So I agree with what Steve just said, that it's really the consumer of software can be the end user, or it could also be an intermediary like a supplier who's bringing OpenSSL into their product. They are a consumer of OpenSSL as well by virtue of bringing it into their product. So it's not just the end consumer, it's the party that is relying on the trustworthiness of whatever that is. And I think Neil made a really good point when he said that we're making a statement of trust. So the question is, what is, and I think we all agree that SCITT is a statement of trustworthiness of something. So the question is, what is that something? Are we saying that that something ends at the evidence, that we're saying the evidence is trustworthy? Or are we saying that the product which the evidence supports is trustworthy? So this is all part of the scope and the purpose of SCITT that I believe we need to nail down. Where does this trust boundary end, so that when someone checks SCITT for an entry in the registry, what does that entry mean? Does it mean the evidence is trustworthy? Does it mean the product is trustworthy? So the question is, what does a SCITT entry really indicate? What is the thing that's trusted? Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Neil?
So I wanted to bring this up in kind of a different context. In some of the materials that I looked at, and I have to apologize for not having read as much as I should be in this realm, but there is a notion of having multiple SCITT registries, multiple SCITT instances. And some of those instances might have different rules on who they allow to publish statements and things like that. And so one thing that it raises for me is the likelihood that if this is a good protocol, then the hacking community, malware authors and whatever, might put up SCITT instances saying, hey, I've got a hack for this, and you should contact me if you want to buy it on the black market. And I'll note the ability these days, people have published papers on how to make a zero knowledge proof that a piece of software is vulnerable to something that you might want to publish before you actually reveal how it works and try to get a bug bounty or whatever. So it raises for me the question of if there are multiple SCITT instances, how, we usually are using language like check SCITT as opposed to look at the SCITTs that I'm, interested in, which of course dramatically complicates the life for the relying party. How do you find the SCITT instances that might have evidence that you want to work with? And do we have any use cases that deal with that notion of there being instances that are more authoritative for some perceptions and others that are very interesting, even though you're really not sure whether to trust them or not?
Good point. Yeah, I hope I captured your question correctly. Thanks, Neil. Henk.
Yeah, this is Hank. Sorry, I lost track of my notes there. I switched the tab and now they're gone. So from the top of my head. So Dick was highlighting consumers. Bob was highlighting, yeah, but definitely supply chain entities, and you said just to do a small recap here. But it should not include the decision. It should be the basis for decision making, right? If you want accountability and auditability here by the facts, not by some opinion. And I think that's a very good scoping question of content. We have never talked about a semantic relationship, a semantic interoperability, and labeling items. There are some things that we definitely want to have as non-opaque data. For example, a well-structured thing that says the actual content you're looking for is not here, but is stored at some other place because it already existed there, and we are not transferring the whole thing here. So there will be some non-opaque structures here that will help with this everyday problems, like where's the actual data. But then also, I think that's a scoping and chartering question. So for now, the very minimum is what Neil said. I think it's about the basis for decision making. But when you look at it from a RETS point of view, it definitely also is the decision making is, for example, endorsement documents like reference integrity manifests. These are statements coming from a supply chain entity, now addressing Bob's scope a little bit more. And they're, of course, also from users, but the other users sometimes also are supply chain entities. So I think it's very hard to differentiate by roles, such as consumers, supply chain entities, or by message type complexity, like it's the bare, I want to say build evidence now because it's or remote attestation evidence or some other evidence. Sometimes it's also an endorsement or a result that you may want to make publish, like a virus scan. So if you put a virus scan in here as a reaffirming fact, then you could also put an attestation result in here as a reaffirming fact. So that's not the pure evidence anymore, right? And I think that is again a scoping questions on two parts. It's who we are addressing here, who are the communication partners that consume and put something onto SCITT, and there's another dimension here about the complexity of the message you put into SCITT. Is it the original very first data item, or did I already have some informed opinion about it? I think both dimensions are okay, but they have to be well documented. And for the first round here in the scope of this charter, I think that has to be well defined. And that might be part of the threat security model. It might be part of the architecture, but I think it must become an issue or a task that we address these two dimensions.
Thank you. Bob.
Okay, so I'm going to try to address, I think it was Neil's discussion about, we say SCITT ledger. Actually, when I give a talk about SCITT, I talk about like 4 or 5 different ledgers. And so in my head, someone who's creating something, and in this instance, we're talking software, they would run a SCITT ledger for their product line, for their development efforts, and they would put in, the evidence about they did a scan, here's the SBOM, here's the test results, whatever it is that they're going to be using to offer that, enough has been done that you can rely on this product. If you're making a different product, you would have a different ledger, and in the permissions would be the, are you from this company and therefore authorized to write to it or about these product lines. But then there could be other ledgers where you're making a more public statement and you're using the facts from those kind of more confidential corporate ledgers to support it. And you're endorsing what's there, but making it more publicly available and searchable. So that may be, a community for ledger for software providers. versus steel providers or something. So anyways, that's the way I have been thinking about this.
Thanks, Bob. Please help me to sort of summarize the different types of registries that you mentioned in the meeting minutes. John.
Hello. There we go. I think we're all having trouble with mics today. So yeah, a couple of points just to partly keep us on track, because I do think that this question keeps on threatening to massively inflate our scope, and we'll never get anything published. So while I think Dick's request is a great application of something that you could build when you have information available through a SCITT registry or a number of SCITT registries, my understanding of our scope and charter, and the one that I'm trying to drive as co-chair here, is the simple one, which says we make sure all of the same facts are available to every authorized reader, and we make sure that the people who published those supposed facts are identifiable in some obvious way, and that's it. And then you make up your own conclusions based on reading those reasonably reliable facts. And the fundamental reason for that is that if we go any further than that, you end up having to define communities of people who all think exactly the same way about security and risk, and that just simply never happens, and we'll never get anywhere. So that's the line we're going down. Now, there was a request for concrete examples of where this is useful, or to Neil's question about the various different roles. So I have two, which I think illustrate this very nicely, of real things that I actually do commercially. So for the UK and US, well, UK public sector and the US DoD, but you know, same kind of thing. We've done some projects and feasibilities on large collaborative systems, and in particular, the basic thing is to say, well, if I'm going to have self-driving vehicles on the road with AI models controlling how they conduct themselves, there are lots and lots of moving parts here, and somebody can say, yeah, we've just published the software and that's great, and somebody else can publish the firmware for a particular chip that's in the car, somebody else can publish the AI model, and yet another person could be in a research lab finding hacks in all of those things and publishing their research and putting out warnings. And so those researchers are absolutely as valid people to make observations and attestations about that software as the people who purchase it or the people who produce it. And it's up to the risk holder to then decide whether they care about that researcher's findings, or whether it's relevant to them, or whether they ignore it or not. So we absolutely have real life cases today where many people can make claims on things that they don't even own, which may or may not be interesting to a large community of different relying parties. On the other side, just to illustrate the question of whether things are actually true or not, because we do talk about these claims or statements or whatever, on the build side, something that I do, something my company does for a bit of transparency, is that we publish vulnerability reports in every release we have for our front end, because our front end is mainly a JavaScript application. It uses NPM. NPM has a built-in audit function that will tell you how many vulnerable packages you have. So it's a pretty simple smoke test to make sure you don't do anything silly. And we can publish a build artifact that says we ran NPM audit and it said no vulnerabilities. That isn't necessarily true. I mean, I hope it's true since I'm talking about my own business, but it doesn't have to be. But the fact that we said it was is heavily recorded and non-reputable in the SCITT ledger, which means that if somebody else makes a decision based on that, and it turns out to be provably not true because you then run NPM audit on the same code and it shows up something else, that hasn't saved you necessarily from a very specific, very niche cybersecurity or software composition threat, but it does tell you an awful lot about the quality of your supply chain, whose fault something was, and who's on the hook to remedy it. So I think the other thing that we need to bear in mind that gets lost a lot in these conversations is that we're not necessarily trying to make things 100% bulletproof or trying to somehow create a world where things are 100% true once they're said. What we're trying to do is make decent basis, as Henk said, a really strong basis for decision making, which is auditable and reliable after the fact. I think any deviation from that is going to take us forever to finish the use cases.
Thanks, John. Was able to capture most of it, what you said, but please have a look just to make sure. Steve.
I'm just watching the clock and I'm just trying to figure out the right thing. I mean, we've talked about the multiple instances a couple of times, and I believe we've captured this, and I'll go back and look at the architecture docs. But I think the multiple instances are really important for reasons that Ali had brought up and others, where you're going to have different software vendors that are producing things, different entities and hardware manufacturers that are producing their information. You'll also have companies that I think Ali mentioned that they might go out bankrupt and they may no longer exist. So you want that software is still out there. We also live in a world where we're actually getting information from other entities as to the quality. You know, we run various security scanners that are making recommendations and decisions on other software companies. So I could think of SCITT being multiple instances from the software companies that I choose to do business with, or aggregators that I choose to do business with. And then I might contract with a particular security company that is also providing information on their SCITT ledger. And because they're all using the same standards that we're developing here, I can make tools that can read from various SCITT ledgers. And I trust, security company A to be giving me updated information around the software that came from companies that may or may not currently be running, or may have had a problem for some period of time, right? We know the brand awareness that VW went through. They're coming back. The point is that there's things that change over time, and I think we want to be able to have multiple instances to get multiple sources of information from, again, still from entities we trust. I shouldn't be going to SCITT that's hosted by Badco to get kind of reliable information from.
Thanks, Steve. I think Cedric, you're next.
Yes, I agree with John and with Steve, and I just want to clarify again the basic policy for alien parties. So there will be advanced scenarios where it's important to look at multiple registries and to look at multiple issuers, and all of that is fine. But nonetheless, I believe that in many cases the basic policy will be of the form: I'm expecting a transparent statement about one particular artifact from one authoritative issuer registered on one transparency service. And then we can make it more general, and maybe some people will pick different transparency services. But for that to work, it means that the transparency service that will be constant in many of the basic related parties policy should be reasonably stable and reputable and long-lived. Yes, people will have more detailed ledgers for on the production side or maybe on the auditing side, but for sharing all information about the class of artifacts in an ecosystem, having a single ledger that is that has the complete history of what has been said about the artifact is, I expect, still the base most useful case for it. So we have federation, that's great, but the basic story is for most people there will be a single transparency service.
Okay, Neil.
So I guess my vision had been more in what I'll call the SIG store model, where, as I understand it, there's a single kind of big public-facing anybody, all-comers instance, which feels good because it's, I have a sense that it's going to be there. If what I'm hearing, I'm hearing some suggestion that each company will run their own instance, their own servers, their own API endpoints. And I wouldn't want to have to trust that the suppliers will keep them up and running. So, what I would prefer is for there to be ways to prevent spam and so on, so that you have to have some qualified identity to publish. But I prefer that it all be in, if not one place, at least a smaller number of places. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what people are suggesting, but another aspect of this is it might help to have a use case that reflects two different relying parties, each looking at the same SCITT instances and making different decisions. One saying, well, that convinces me. Sure, yeah, Google said it's good for the App Store, so it's good for me. Another saying, well, I haven't seen, a red team publish anything saying that that they really understand this stuff and it looks good to them. So I don't find it trustworthy enough for my use case, for my my trust threat model. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Dick.
Thank you, Hannes. Yeah, I think we could make some really good progress if we could reach a consensus on what that trust statement refers to in the registry. If indeed we say that the trust statement simply means the evidence is trustworthy, well, I can live with that. It just means I have to pull down the evidence and process it in order to reach the ultimate conclusion I'm looking for, which is a software product trustworthy. So we can either say that a registry entry means that evidence is trustworthy, or it can mean that a software product is trustworthy, or it can mean something else. So I think if we can come to some closure on what we think or what we agree a trust statement in a SCITT registry means, we can really then just take it from that point and start to flush out the details. Thank you.
Okay, I think, there's, to rephrase it slightly, what a statement in the SCITT registry means. That's the question you have. Okay.
That's spot on, Hannes. What does it mean? What are the semantics? Does it mean the evidence is trustworthy? Or does it mean the software product is trustworthy? So I think if we can come to some closure on what we all agree a trust statement represents, then I think we can start to flush out some of the details. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Got it. Steve.
Yeah, Dick, I think the question is this trust statement would probably vary to the industry and the area that's being pertained. Government agencies will have different statements that they're looking for. Does it meet, federal government policy XYZ? An emergency management system will look for how does it meet their policy. A gaming company might look for a different thing, and vice versa. So I think it's a matter of, is there a definition of what a format of a statement is? Just like when you give a document to a notary, there's a place where you put signatures and dates and who endorses it, the types of IDs you provide. And then there's a link to a document. I think that'll be the same thing here. I don't think it's up to the SCITT working group to define whether, and we've had this conversation a couple of times before, whether a particular VEX or particular SBOM format is the right format for the statement. I think the idea is that there is a statement made and there's a way to represent a statement, and it's based on an identity, and then based on who the entity trying to consume this information, they are looking for certain statements. They might look for VEX versus SBOM. They might look for foo versus bar. I think the question is, how do we provide something that will stand the test of time, that information can be acquired and evaluated for the particular target environment that it's shooting for? I don't know if we can meet one standard that meets them all from a quality statement, because those will vary. And I think it's just on the other instance one, I think there's different, again, it's the same thing. The government agencies will be running their instance. In fact, different government agencies will probably run different instances because of within, whether it be FBI, CIA, or whatever. We can use TV show acronyms to kind of glamorize it, but those are the reality. Is there's different boundaries. Software companies have lots of software they build themselves that they never make public. It's their internal software. And that kind of information wouldn't be public either, but they still have the need to put statements on that they can verify within that supply chain that they're building. So I think the multiple instances, make sense in the sense that that's just kind of natural how distribution systems work. And I think it's the model that we're trying to do here. It doesn't say that there aren't some large instances that might exist out there. Right, this is part of Kathleen's position. There might be an emergency management system that is stood up that only entities that can be trusted for that kind of those statements are allowed to write to, and who has access to pull information from. It all depends.
Thanks, Steve. That was good. Hank. By the way, we are running out of time. I noticed.
Okay, yeah. Hi, this is Hank. So just again, maybe recapping somehow this, I want to echo John's concern that we would implode if we try to make a model of semantic interoperability here. I also think if we just put in exactly plain statements that are all opaque, we cannot address the use cases Dick and Bob are highlighting. So there has to be a minimal amount of understanding what you get. I think that's what we have to focus on to make it work. And then, unfortunately, today the I want to say 6-door folks are not joining in. I guess it's a US holiday, but nevertheless, they have some core semantics. And for example, looking at those and putting those in on a layer that is already in the statement level, or maybe in between the SCITT notarization function and the statement level, might be an option we can talk about. I think we can learn a lot, and it would be a low-hanging fruit for interoperability with something that exists, and not putting in the identity discussion that some people are worried about. So that's something to do. But for now, let's start with the assumption everything is opaque. We add some semantics along the way when we see we can't answer a simple question in bigger systems that Dick or Bob would like to be answered, or Neil, right? So that's our litmus test, basically. But start with a simple thing, address John's concern of this explodes in complexity if we do it more. But we also have to answer in the end with some proof of concept implementations, actual questions coming from consumers or supply chain entities. So there's a middle ground here. There are some, I think, reference semantics we can pull in probably as a low-hanging fruit. We have to check that. But I'm pretty optimistic actually that this is a monthly iteration process, and in 23 we can show some working things that would be actually notarizing items, and then also yield answers to the questions asked by actual real-world entities.
Thanks, Hank. Neil.
Yeah, I was going to say much of what Hank just said, so I'll just agree with that. Thanks.
I kind of agree with what John's point was, and also Hank's point. The point we are trying to make using SCITT is making a statement in transparent manner and making the issuer of the statement accountable for what statement he's making. Now, how the consumer would like to establish a trust based on the statement is between the issuer and the consumer. It's like a policy. The SCITT ledger cannot by default making an evidence statement makes it trustworthy. It is something like how do we explain that is uh, it is for the individuals, and the individual policy of all you can verify through SCITT is that yes, SCITT can guarantee that yes, this statement is present, and you can verify that cryptographically that its presence can be proved that yes, it is present. But how to interpret that is between how the supplier would like the consumers to interpret, and how the consumers would interpret based on their policies. So it's really, I think, and then they judge, then they make out the trustworthiness based on that second level of verification, which is, I think, very use case specific, and it is possibly beyond the scope of a generic skit architecture. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Yogesh. Ray, do you want to say a few last words because we ran out of time?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on what Steve was saying in terms of the confidentiality of these ledgers. I put it in the chat too. I'm kind of worried about that dimension because I mean, in terms of, I don't think it's in our use case in terms of whether the entries are confidential or public, and whether the whole ledger is public or confidential. I think that's getting into that. I think maybe we should try to explicitly avoid that one thing, but it's food for thought for next time. Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, I wasn't able to follow the chat, but I think I've captured most of the discussions in the meeting minutes. So hope that's good. While I didn't manage to go to the topics I originally wanted to talk about, namely the identity and the terminology, I think I personally got something out of the meeting, and I hope you did too, in the discussions about what I would call scope and architectural questions. So I will trigger a mailing list discussion about those and see if the rest of the group agrees with some of the directions that people are proposing here. I think we're getting somewhere. And as I said earlier, we'll start the document adoption process. Okay, with that, I would like to thank you all for joining, and I wish you a great day.
Thanks, Hannes.
Thank you. Good meeting. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, really good.
Glad to hear.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thanks, Neil. Great comments.